Aloha, e como mai, and welcome aboard. I'm Larry Jackson, owner of Cruise Holidays of Viera, and I'll be your cruise director for this week's edition of our podcast magazine that's all about the magical world of travel and cruising. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. This is the first podcast that we've made in several months, and that was due mainly to the pandemic that we've been through from this coronavirus. As many of you who used to listen to us on the radio know, we had a Saturday morning radio show on one of the local stations here in Melbourne, Florida. We've had to discontinue that due to the loss of revenue that we've had because of the cancellation of all of the cruises worldwide, which is a great deal of our business. But we haven't been on the air either because, frankly, the news of the cruise industry has been very disjointed. It's one day we get a report of one thing, the next day, no, we're not going to do that. And every time we get a cancellation or suspension of service, a few weeks later, we get another suspension of service. So I didn't really feel like it was worthwhile to come and talk to you until I had something a little bit more concrete to talk about. I was waiting for kind of the hysteria and the panic and everything else that's been involved in this whole situation to die down a little bit, so that we could start to make clear and rational decisions about how we're going to start back up the cruise industry and the whole travel industry. We're not there yet. Cooler minds, voices are starting to prevail. I think we might be approaching the time that we can start to look forward to going back to cruising and have some definite time frames and some procedures in place of how we're going to do that. So I thought I'd come back on the air and talk with you. First of all, I want to let you know that Cruise Holidays of Viera is alive and well. We've been in business for 17 years now. Our office is still open Monday through Friday. Now, we've reduced our hours a little bit. We're working from, our office hours are from 9 a.m. till noon each weekday, Monday through Friday. You can call us at 321-242-1331, or you can go to our webpage and then email us at justcruising.viera.com. And there's some pages there of how to contact us, and also some great information about cruising. If you haven't been cruising before and you would like to get involved in it, when we do restart, our website is a great place for you to go. Well, let's go back and look at how all this started. There's a lot of events people have in their lifetime that they remember for a long, long time. You've talked to our previous generations about Pearl Harbor Day, and then for us, I think mostly we remember the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and of course the terrorist attack on New York City on 9/11. And with each one of these events has always been, people remember exactly where they were and what they were doing and what time of day it was when they first heard about these catastrophic events. And so it is with this whole pandemic situation that we're being facing. I will never forget what I will always call Black Friday. It was Friday, March 13th, 2020, and I was in my cabin aboard the Holland America Koningsdam, and Lynn and I were getting ready for dinner. We were escorting a group of 60 military officers for their annual scholarship fundraising cruise, and we were just wrapping up a 12-day Southern Caribbean cruise. And I had the laptop on the desk in the cabin, and I was reviewing the day's emails. Now, what led up to this was we had been on our cruise. We had, of course, been watching. This was at the same time that the Diamond Princess was being quarantined in Japan. Our cruise itself had been turned away from 2 ports of call because of the coronavirus. We had nobody on our ship with any symptoms or anything else, but we were having to skip islands because of what I still call the hysteria and the fright that this disease caused people. And it was kind of a shame because, as it turned out, we would have been the last ship, and they could have gotten a little bit more income in these Caribbean islands, but that's the way it goes. So we were very much aware of the coronavirus and its impact it was already having on travel and how people were reacting to it. And then I read an email, and we got an email from CLIA, which is Cruise Lines International Association, informing us that the whole cruise industry, basically worldwide, had decided to suspend sailings effective basically immediately, and no new sailings were to go out. Any sailings that, including us, that were already underway could complete their itineraries. That later got modified, but for the most part, that's what was happening. And I looked at that email, and I'll never forget it. I said, boy, 16 years of really hard work to build a travel agency, and it looks like it's really about to go down the drain, because I said this is going to be a devastating impact on our industry. And so there it was, and we went to dinner that night. We announced to all our guests that when we got to Fort Lauderdale, that would be the last sailing of the Koningsdam, and so. And I have to tell you, the one thing that really impressed me was the impact that this had on the crew. Now, they found out about it the same time we did. And for many of these crew members, this was their livelihood, and it was along with ours, but they were from a lot poorer straits than we were. And now they were faced with no employment. They were going to have to try to get home somehow. The income they thought they were going to get for the next 5 or 6 months to support their families in the Philippines and Indonesia, that was gone. And you would expect that would have had a devastating effect on their attitude towards the whole cruise. But they were phenomenal. They went about their business of making sure every guest on their ship was having a great time and was comfortable, as if nothing had happened. And so we continued with the cruise through the 13th, the 14th, and in the morning of the 15th, we cruised into Fort Lauderdale. We were, I think, actually the next to the last or the last ship to arrive back into port. And they had us, we were in our holding areas awaiting the announcement for disembarkation. And we already knew what had happened with quarantining of other passengers on other cruise ships. And I tell you, we were delayed our disembarking by an hour. And that hour was very, very long. I'll never forget it, wondering if they were actually going to let us off the ship onto our 2 private buses to make our way home to Melbourne, Florida. And about an hour and a half later, they did clear the ship. We got off, pressed on, and went home. But I'll never forget looking out the window of the lounge as we were waiting for that announcement and seeing lines of crew members to board buses to get on air flights to get back to their native countries, which, as it turned out, they were the lucky ones, because they didn't get stuck on quarantine ships all over the world and take 5 or 6 months, 4 or 5 months to get back home. But I just remember looking at all those folks and feeling so sad for all those livelihoods that were lost there, standing on the deck. Well, so we got home, and we went to work on Monday, March 16th. Was a really interesting day. We did not know what to expect. We'd never been through anything like this, where the whole industry had shut down just overnight. We didn't know what we were going to do for refunds for our clients. We'd never heard of future cruise credits. There were no plans in place for what do we do. People were calling us, my cruise has been canceled. And then we got a very big shock that we had not anticipated. And as you know, if you listened to our radio show for many years, you know that we have been big proponents of travel insurance, and that we had sold many, many policies for an outfit called Travel Guard, an AIG company. And so we called them and said, okay, our cruises have been canceled. Our guests covered for this. And they go, no, sorry, the policy states that if a cruise is canceled because of an epidemic or a pandemic, the coverage doesn't exist. And that was really a tough blow, because we thought we had covered our clients, and we hadn't. As it turned out, we were able to get future certificates for that insurance that they could use for future travel, even though the cruise itself wasn't covered. And the news got better, because the cruise line stepped up to the plate, and they started either the process of refunding if the cruise was canceled by the cruise line, or providing future cruise credits. And so we began that whole process of contacting people, finding out what their preferences were. Did they want to take the refund? Did they want to get the future cruise credit? We didn't know a lot about the future cruise credits at the time. Everything was really, really new to all of us. And so we got through it, though. And it's been, on top of everything else that we were facing, the cruise lines, in order to cut costs, had to cut staff dramatically. That meant to answer these questions that were totally unknown and never unprecedented actions in the industry. We had to spend many, many hours on hold waiting for somebody. It was not unusual for us to spend 4.5 to 5 hours on hold to get one question answered in the very early days of the end of March and the beginning of April, when all of this really started happening and brought it home to us. But we did our best. And again, I bring this up. I think I can say now, 4 months later, that I think we've gotten everybody their refund or a future cruise credit or rebooked onto another cruise. This was the longest period in the 16 years of Cruise Holidays of Viera that my lovely and gracious wife Linda and I had ever spent ashore without going on a cruise. So it started on March 15th to today is April 28th, and we haven't been on a cruise since then. We have had to cancel our annual Hawaii cruise tour. We were able to rebook all of our guests on this coming April's cruise tour, so we moved our cruise tour to Hawaii back 1 year. Now I'm starting to get worried about that, but we'll just have to take that as it comes. But it was kind of interesting because of the 125% that we used the Norwegian cruise as Pride of America for our cruise tour in Hawaii. And because of the 125% that they were offering, plus the bonus packages, that gratuities, drink packages, onboard credits, and things like that, and plus the fact that they had reduced fares for next year, we were able to rebook our guests to Hawaii in a pit house suite as opposed to just a balcony cabin that they had had previously, and for next April. So that worked out really well, and we were able to get refunds from the hotels and our tour operators. So we're all gung-ho and getting ready to go again next April to Hawaii for our annual cruise tour. Let me just interrupt this podcast just a second to let you know that it is being brought to you by Cruise Holidays of Viera. We are a boutique cruise planning and travel planning store located in Melbourne, Florida, but available to you 24/7 via the World Wide Web and email. We invite you to go to our website, justcruisinviera.com, and have a look at our website, and there'll be information about us and what we do. One of our great pluses that we offer you as a client is that we care about what happens to you. We care about what happens to your trip, what happens to you while you're on your trip, and what happens when your trip gets canceled. And that's what we've been working at. And we've done a really bang-up job, I have to admit. Linda, our assistant Wendy, have been working tirelessly for many, many days to make sure that we get everybody back whole. We have done a really Herculean job to get people back to at least having a future cruise credit or their money back, or not being damaged by the fact that the cruises were canceled by this pandemic. We also invite you to give us a call. We're available at 321-242-1331. For those of you who live in the local Melbourne, Florida area, we are available for you now. By the way, we don't require masks. But we do ask that you give us a call to schedule an appointment before you come in, just to make sure we don't have too many folks in the office here at the same time. And that we're available Monday through Friday, as I said before, from 9 a.m. to noon for appointments. And we'd love to see you and talk about travel. And maybe it's time for you to start thinking about what you'd like to do next year. Well, what I thought we'd do today is just talk about some of the articles that came across the old computer monitor this week. I'm still hesitant to talk about what I think is going to happen in the future because it's so up in the air and it's so changing by the day. As you know, right now we're pretty much on a suspension, mandatory suspension of all cruise sailings by the CDC through the end of September, an additional voluntary suspension by the cruise lines through October 31st. And there's variations of this. Cunard has canceled all cruises through the end of 2020. Windstar just canceled all of their cruises, so different variations. But for the majority of the large cruise lines, and mostly we're talking about Carnival, Norwegian Cruise Lines, and Royal Caribbean. And don't forget, when we talk about these cruise companies, they are the parent companies with the subsidiaries. So in the case of Carnival, we have their subsidiaries being Costa Cruise Lines, Princess, Holland America, Cunard, Seabourn. So we have a lot of different cruise lines involved in this one umbrella. However, most of the cruise lines are operating independent of each other through this whole coronavirus thing. When we talk about Royal Caribbean, we're talking about the parent company for Azamara Cruise Lines, now Silver Sea, because during this suspension of sailing, Royal Caribbean has increased their stakeholder share of Silver Sea to 100%, so now it's a wholly owned subsidiary. Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines and Celebrity. When we talk about Norwegian Cruise Lines, we're not only talking about Norwegian, we're talking about Oceania and Region 7 Seas. So don't forget all of those are together, but each one is operating independently and doing things differently. So we are looking at what's going to happen in the future, and I think the number one hesitancy I have about predicting the future is what the CDC is going to do, and this is going to be our biggest challenge. They have put out a listing of 27 questions that they are requesting public comment on, and I believe that public comment is due back in the latter part of September. And if you read some of the questions that questionnaire has, you wonder if we'll ever get to be sailing again, because they're asking things about, well, how should vendors for excursions be able to provide restroom facilities that will be up to the standard that we have in the United States, so that we don't have a spread of the coronavirus among the people taking excursions. Well, that's going to be very hard to regulate outside of the United States and third world countries where we do a lot of cruising. So we have no idea what the CDC is going to dictate as far as us reopening cruising. And that, to me, is our number one unknown at this time. We don't know how draconian those measures are going to be, what's going to be required, what kind of testing, what all of the things that have been going on. So I thought I'd just share with you today some of the where we're at as far as getting back to being reopened. And one of the major events happened this last week, and that's when the MSC completed a 7-day cruise from Genoa, starting on August 16th, and it was aboard their ship, the Grandiosa. Now, this is a 6,000 passenger ship. There are a lot of caveats here. Now, they didn't just go out and start sailing. First of all, it was limited only to Italians. Second of all, everybody had to be tested and had to test negative for COVID-19 before they could board the ship. You could not take any excursions except MSC excursions, and you could not leave the ship unless you wanted an MSC excursion. The capacity of the boat was only roughly 60% of the 6,300 capability that they have, and so they had roughly 3,000 passengers on board. I have an article from CNN, a very extensive article they did that recapped the cruise. Now, this was the first really successful cruise we've had since basically back in March. We had a couple of other starts. We had a Hurtigruten ship, the Amundsen, had attempted a cruise earlier in July. Unfortunately, about 32 people tested positive with the coronavirus, so they had to cancel the cruise, and then they suspended all future operations. I think one of the most famous ones that happened was the Uncruise cruise in Alaska. And if you're not familiar with Uncruise, they are a very small passenger count ships, in this case 250 passengers, but they only had 36 on board. And they were attempting to do a 7-day cruise in Alaska. And I bring this up because it points out some of the problems we're going to have when we restart our cruising. They made sure that everybody had a negative test for for COVID-19 prior to going to Alaska. Once they got to the Anchorage airport, the Alaskan authorities tested everybody there. And so they had 36 people got on the ship. Everybody tested negative. 2 days later, the Anchorage authorities, the state of Alaska authorities, reported that one of the tests was positive. One of the passengers tested positive, even though he had a negative test just a few days earlier. They returned the ship to Anchorage, put everybody in a 14-day quarantine in a hotel, and then we found out 2 weeks later that the test was wrong, and it was, it was nothing, and the person had been asymptomatic, but we lost the whole cruise. And then following that, the Paul Gauguin and Tahiti had attempted to restart. They had some tests that were positive, no symptoms, tested positive, shut down the whole operation. And so that's why the MSC Grandiosa sailing was kind of important, because it's the first time we actually got one kicked off. Now, everything went smoothly. The only problems that they had were they did have some folks that showed up at the terminal, and this is, again, one of the things that we're going to have to work with in the future, that a set of guests showed up, and one person, asymptomatic again, one person tested positive for the COVID-19. So they denied boarding to everybody in his party. They were not able to go on the cruise. I don't know what happened as far as refunds are concerned like that. I know it's not in the article, so I don't know what happened. On top of that, they had ridden in from the airport with some people in a van, and the people in the van were not able to board. So you can see some of the problems that we're facing when we talk about reopening cruising. If it's going to, one other problem, I'm sorry, I forgot the other problem they had, went out on their excursions. They were in Naples. A family, for whatever reason, I don't know if they went to see family members or whatever, they left the excursion. Well, when they got back to the ship, they wouldn't let them back on board. They packed all of their belongings up, put them on the deck, and they were off on their way home again. So you can see when we have these regulatory bodies overseeing this, that's a problem. And then we have false tests. That's a problem. And how we're going to be able to overcome all of that, at this point, I really don't know. Now, there was an article this week that there is a new test that Abbott Labs has developed. This may be a help. I don't know. The new test that they have developed takes about 5 minutes. It's the size of a credit card. It can be administered by like a nurse or a medical profession, and doesn't have to go to a laboratory and come back 2 or 3 days later. So that will allow us to do testing at the terminal. Of course, one of the problems I have with the test, it's only good for about 30 seconds, because after that you can walk out of the room, be exposed, get it, 2 days later you're going to test positive. So I don't know what good that would really do. But everybody seems to think we got to have testing before we get back on. So the good news is Abbott is developing a test, has developed a test that looks like we can be able to use it on cruise lines, on cruise ships. And Abbott has said that they're preparing to to produce and ship 50 million of these tests by October. One of our cruise lines is also going to try to reopen in September, is going to be the Costa Cruises, and they have said that it's going to be mandatory that everyone who boards the ship has a negative COVID-19 test. Now, they don't say how long it's going to take. In other words, I don't know if you've noticed, but some of the states that have been on lockdowns have considered, and I'm thinking of Alaska and Hawaii, have considered allowing people to fly there, to not have to go to quarantine if once they arrive and they take the test at the airport, they test negative. So that would be a very, very useful thing. Many of you who have followed us at Cruise Holidays of Viera over the years know that we are Hawaii destination experts. That's why I'm wearing my Hawaiian Aloha shirt today. And Hawaii has been a great source of love for us. Our family lives there. As a matter of fact, they just visited us a few weeks ago, and they're now completing the end of their 2-week quarantine when they went back home. And we're very concerned about the fact that Hawaii has shut down so completely over this whole thing all the way back to the middle of March. And we're very concerned as to what's going to happen as far as the tourist industry when they come back. But we're hoping that everything is just going to rebound in Hawaii. Again, we're planning our next cruise tour for April, and hopefully things will be reopened again. Well, listen, I talked earlier about the insurance and how we were very surprised to find out that our travel insurance policies didn't cover us for pandemics or epidemics. We were able to get future insurance certificates for people who had cruises that were canceled. So, we were able to get out of it something. But I think it's reshaped the way we're going to look at travel insurance going forward. This whole pandemic is going to change a lot of things in travel. I'm just looking into my crystal ball here, and I'm making a wild-ass guess as to what I think things are going to look like. But one of the things that has come out of this is what the cruise lines are calling, each one of them has a different name for it. Norwegian calls it the peace of mind. And they have changed basically the way they're going to allow you to cancel cruises. Right now, the programs are limited to reservations that are made, for instance, with Norwegian through September 30th of 2020. And what they're allowing you to do is that for any sailings in 2020, if there are any, guests are free to cancel anytime up to 48 hours in advance of the cruise. And that's for any cruise embarking prior to December 31st. And if you cancel during that period, then you will receive a future cruise credit for 100% of the cost of your cruise. That cruise certificate is good through December for cruises through December 31st of 2022. For 2021 sailings, again, I'm using Norwegian as an example, but all the cruise lines are doing something very similar on their new cancellation policies. For 2021 sailings, you'll be able to cancel anytime up until 15 days of embarkation and receive a future cruise certificate for 100% of your cruise voyages. And so, one of the reasons that we purchased cruise or travel insurance in the past was for cancellation, and so that's kind of gone along the wayside here. So that's changing our minds of whether we want to do this. What we think is going to the other thing that's happening is that the cruise lines have moved the final payment dates from 120 days to 60 days before the cruise. So that gives you another 60 days to be able to change your mind and basically get your deposit back. Or, there may be some penalties, different cruise lines. But anyway, you get a longer time up until a shorter period of time before the cruise to basically change your mind as to whether you want to go through it or not. So again, that's changed our outlook on travel insurance. We believe that going in the future, we will be probably purchasing the cruise line's insurance for their medical evacuation provisions, or we will be looking at policies. Maybe an insurer is going to come out with policies that will just be basically for medical evacuation. And along those lines, and we have seen this in a couple of the smaller cruise lines, MSC has been discussing this, and that's a COVID-19 insurance policy. Virgin Atlantic this week announced that they're going to be offering a free COVID-19 insurance policy to all of their passengers. Now, they're doing this in conjunction with Allianz Insurance Company. And this is for passengers flying on the airline between now and March 31st of 2021. And the flights in question, you have to book your flight with Virgin Atlantic, not with, there may be a case with a very famous one that we do a lot is you may take Delta over to Europe to Amsterdam, and you'll have a code sharing operation with Virgin Atlantic on the way from London back to Orlando. that segment doesn't count because it wasn't purchased through Virgin Atlantic. It was purchased through Delta. But what they're going to be offering is $654,000 of coverage for medical treatment outside of your home country, including repatriation. That's if they had to send an airplane to pick you up or something like that. They will also allow you $4,000 in quarantine accommodation costs and $2,000 in transportation in your home country to get back home again. So let's see if some of our other vendors and travel folks are going to be offering this COVID-19 type of protection. I think it could be another incentive to get people back to traveling, knowing that if something goes wrong, that they'll be able to be covered. One of our other big considerations during this whole pandemic thing has been what's going to happen to our cruise lines, with their loss of income. Are they going to be able to stay in business? That's basically the bottom line. And I know a lot of you have been more concerned about other things than being focused in on the cruise industry and all the things that we've been going through in the cruise industry as far as what's been going on in the finances. And basically what the cruise lines have done is they went out and they went to their creditors and to the open market and they sold bonds, they sold stock, they put ships up as collateral, they put private islands up as collateral. They raised as much of a cash facility as they could possibly get their hands on. And what they are doing is they're trying to get as much cash in the bank that they can to be able to pay the expenses that they're paying out while they cannot have any revenue. And this has led to a new term called zombie corporations, and these are corporations that are existing only to pay off debt and interest to the bondholders that they went to get the money from. And we have lost a few of the smaller cruise lines. We lost 4 cruise lines in Europe, none of which you have ever heard of, trust me. We did lose one small ship company to bankruptcy here in the United States, and that's the Blout Small Ship Company. I know you've never heard of them either. They're basically cruising on the Great Lakes and things like that. So far we're getting along well as far as the cruise lines and their holding companies being able to stay in business, providing refunds, future cruise certificates, and those kinds of things. How much money are they burning? Boy, it's pretty remarkable. The Cruise Industry News magazine did a estimate earlier this month on how much the major cruise lines are going through each month. Carnival Corporation is burning, their cash burn is $1 billion, $1 billion with a B dollars per month. Royal Caribbean is estimating burning through $400 million a month. Norwegian Cruise Lines is estimating burning $150 million per month. MSC is estimated to be burning $180 million per month. And Disney Cruise Lines at $42 million per month. Of course, Disney's got a lot of other worries besides that as far as burning cash. The cruise lines have all told us that they can go without sailing a single ship through the middle part of 2021. They have enough money in the bank to be able to keep that going. So that's where we are. Is if you've been worried about the cruise lines and their ability to stay going during this whole thing. One of the things that we're doing, as you have no doubt heard, is they've been doing what they call warm layups of the ships. That's where the ship goes to some other port or goes out to sea. We have a whole bunch of them off the coast of Florida here and the Bahamas that are out there floating around. They come in for provisions, and they have skeleton crews on board, and that's really reducing the cost of the burn rate that the different cruise lines are having to keep these ships going. Now, if this thing keeps on going much further, they'll be looking at doing something called a cold layup, and that's where they really bring down the systems on board the ship, really turn off everything on the ship. Very minimal crew on board. Now, the disadvantages of these different states of layups is the amount of time it takes you to get back in service. From a cold layup, it can be anywhere up to 6 months. For a warm layup, it can be 2 to 3 months. So we're still worried about once we get the go-ahead, how long is it going to be before we can actually start back up again? Now, one of the articles I read this week came from here at Port Canaveral, where the CEO of the Port Canaveral, the manager of the CEO of the terminal, was basically tasked by the commissioners to come up with a new budget based upon what they're seeing with the cruise lines and when they think they'll be able to get back in service. And what he's basically saying is that he believes it'll take 45 to 60 days from the day where they say, go ahead, you can go sailing again, to where the ships can be fired back up, get the crews on board, and actually come to the port and go out sailing. And so he doesn't really feel like there's going to be any cruising out of here at Port Canaveral, which, by the way, is the second busiest port in the world, until probably January of 2021. After that, his prediction is that we'll have 4 cruise lines here: Royal Caribbean, Carnival, Norwegian Cruise Lines, and Disney, and that those 4 cruise lines will only be operating 1 ship. Previously, most of them were operating at least 2 ships and sometimes 3 and 4 ships, and that that 1 ship each of the cruise lines will be operating at a 50% capacity. So that's going to even further reduce the amount of people and normalcy that we'll be able to get back to cruising. So this is just, again, everybody's guessing. Nobody really has a great idea as to what's going to happen, how long it's going to take us to get back going again. I don't want to sound too negative, but I think we are starting to see some glimmers of hope to where we can start to get some dates where we can start to say, okay, we feel a little bit more confident about you booking a cruise, let's say in June of next year in the Caribbean. It may be September of next year, 2021, before we feel confident to make a booking for Europe. So, but what I want you to do, my listeners, is to start what I call dream planning. Maybe you don't have a date, maybe you don't have an exact destination, but let's start thinking about where we want to go when this thing reopens, because I know a lot of you are like Linda and I. If they brought the ship up to the pier tomorrow morning at Port Canaveral, we would get on board it and be happy to sail away anywhere they wanted to take us, because we really miss cruising that much. I was beginning to tell you about all the cancellations we had. First of all, we canceled our April cruise for Hawaii. Then we were scheduled to escort a group, and we had a group all board booked on Silver Sea. A wonderful cruise in Alaska that we were anticipating taking in May. And we're going to take this cruise again. We've got another group booked on it, and we're going to do it again next July 9th. This cruise includes flying into Anchorage, an overnight stay at the hotel, getting on the train and going down to Seward, boarding the Silver Muse, a 680 passenger ship with a 600 square foot stateroom. Fantastic way to see Alaska. Can't wait to do this. We had to cancel that cruise in May. Then in July, we were supposed to escort another Silver Sea cruise in England. It was going to start in Greenwich, which is up the Thames River. If you've never cruised up the Thames River, that is a experience of a lifetime. There was so much history associated with England and the Thames River that it's just a true joy. These are the things that I really miss most about cruising, is the ability to go and see places and learn things, and to meet people and see things and learn history. I think everybody talks about all the decadence on a ship, the parties, the dancing, and the booze and all of that stuff. But I think one of the great things that I'm missing most about cruising is exploring the world. And it's such a great way to do that. And we're really missing it. So we had to cancel that in July. Then in August, we were scheduled to take our children and grandchildren on a Disney cruise. Matter of fact, we should have been doing that last weekend. But of course that got canceled, so we had to get a future cruise certificate for that. And that got canceled. Now we still have one cruise left. I can't assure you that we're going to be going on it, but we're scheduled in October, the first part of October, to board the American Cruise Line's newest ship, the Song. She's a 300-passenger ship that cruises the Columbia and Snake Rivers, beginning in Spokane, Washington, and ending in Portland, Oregon. The problem we're having there is that the ship is below the minimum of the passengers that the CDC is regulating. Still don't know how the CDC got in charge of cruising. Maybe we'll find out one of these days. But they are right now, and so we don't have to abide by their rules or whatever their dictates turn out to be. But the problem we're having with our river cruises in the United States is the ports of call are scared to death because they hear ship and they hear corona, and they assume that everybody in their town is going to catch coronavirus if a ship shows up one of these days with 160 passengers on it. So until we are able to get over all of that, whether it's via testing or whatever, I don't know, we can't have our American river cruises. So we're scheduled to go in October, but I'm not optimistic. Again, longest period of time we've ever, since our 17 years of business at Cruise Holidays of Vera, that we've been landlocked and on shore. And we're getting really antsy to get back out there. So, and by the way, you, our audience and listeners, will be the absolute first people to find out about it. By the way, if you'd like to be on our mailing list, we are sending out emails with updates about the travel industry and cruising. Please go to our website, justcruisinviera.com, and there's a page there on signing up for our email list, and you can get our updates. It'll let you know when our podcasts are coming out and that sort of thing. So we'll be happy to put you on our list and add you to our fan base. We were talking earlier about the burn rates of the different cruise lines, and we talked about Blount cruises going out of business, and we've had a few scares. Now, one of the things that's been going around is Crystal Cruises. Crystal is a very upscale luxury cruise line, both ocean and river. Crystal is owned by a company called Genting. It's out of Hong Kong, and it's having a lot of financial difficulties, to the point that they have said that they're not going to pay some of their creditors. Well, this has severely impacted Crystal, which has already suspended their sailings all the way through the end of the year of 2020. But they are assuring everyone, including the different travel agencies, the big, large travel agencies, that they will be coming back, that they will be sailing in 2021, and that the problems that their parent company is having, Genting, is not going to impact Crystal Cruises as such. So let's keep our fingers crossed, because we don't want to lose any big cruise lines that will impact the confidence people are going to have in booking and going on cruises in the future. Well, I think that's pretty much going to do it for this week for us. We are, again, available to you if you'd like to discuss possible cruises. I think one of the things that people have been looking for, they're kind of holding off and saying, you know what, they're going to have to really drop the cruise prices to get everybody back on board the cruise ships. It's not necessarily going to be so, because for one thing, we're going to be operating at reduced capacity. Another thing, the cruise lines are going to have to make up this revenue that they're losing, and I just don't. We're already seeing cruise pricing and cruise bookings increasing. I did a booking on a celebrity cruise this week for December of 2021. And several of the dining times were already gone, and there weren't a lot of cabins available. So things are still booking up, and I don't think prices are going to go that far down. I understand your hesitancy about making a deposit or booking a cruise right now, but don't forget all of these new cancellation policies that we have. So give us a call, 321-242-1331. Go to our website, justcruisinviera.com. And we hope to see you again next week on a podcast, and I hope you'll be able to tune us in. Until we see you again, keep on cruising.